Hello, my name is Jamie Tomey, and I am so pleased to welcome you to today's Quarantour with Sam Lewis. Sam calls himself an accidental puppeteer, and I really hope that you enjoy this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. Hi, welcome to our Quarantour. This week we are joined by Sam Lewis. Sam, hello.
Hi, good afternoon.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me.
I am so happy to have you. This is our first puppeteer conversation that we've had in these Quarantours, and I am excited that you're the first one because I can't wait to hear what you have to say about puppetry and books and history and all of the things that we were talking about earlier. So everybody, this is Sam Lewis. Sam, I'm going to ask you the first question we usually start with is how did you come to the book arts? But I'm going to flip it a little bit for you and say, how did you come to puppeteering?
Well, yes, and as the lead up suggested, I consider myself an accidental puppeteer. So, as you can see from my background, which is filled with various vintage items and such, my wife's family especially are huge rummage sale people, thrift store folks, estate sales, all kinds of stuff like that. And so I was over my in-laws' house and I was up in their attic and I ran across some puppets, some marionettes, and they were from the 1940s, the late 1940s, made in New York, a company called Talentune and or F&B, F&B Puppets and Talentune, kind of synonymous brands. And so they had all these really cool puppets, and one of them was what they call, they named him Jambo the Jiver, and he was supposed to be kind of a zoot suiter type character. And they had a whole bunch, they had a series of characters that were all fairly politically incorrect characters here. They had Kilroy the cop, the kind of drunken Irish cop.
Oh my gosh.
They had Pimbo the clown, Jambo the Jiver, that's the one I love to work with, Toonie from the Congo, and so like based on Talentune, and then Mac Awful the Scot. And so they were at least equal opportunity abusers. So
of all cultures, please, I didn't see a white man on that list, but so I assume that it was all the cultures being stereotyped and offended with that. So you found Jambo.
Yeah, found Jambo, and this was coming off of, maybe a couple years prior, watching Bamboozled, the movie by Spike Lee, where he really dives into kind of racist, what they call Black Americana iconography and objects. And so I was really fascinated to kind of reinterpret that puppet from my perspective. And so I asked him if I could borrow it. That was like almost 15 years ago. And since I've like accumulated pretty much, I think I have the entire set now and multiples of a lot of them, especially Jambo.
Did you search for that marionette?
He had them. And see, this is the advantage of being affiliated with collectors. Some would say, hoarders, but they hoard very beautiful things and keep them in immaculate condition. So, yeah. And so I started working with it, and I renamed him Jus Hambone, and just started just playing, really seriously just playing with it. And then some people that were affiliated with Lynx at the time, this woman Shoshana, who was doing a puppetry series affiliated with the old Lynx back in Wrigleyville, and asked me to perform, and I was like, okay. And that started me down the road. And it was ironic that Lynx Hall was the first place, because I had since developed a long-standing relationship with Lynx, especially during the Roel era. And it was, and really Roel is one of the reasons why I work at Ragdale today and why I went to a residency at Ragdale. So a lot of this stuff came through this puppetry.
So for our audience, people who don't know Lynx, can you explain what Lynx Hall and Lynx, what that group did and does, and, or I don't know if it's still, I mean, we're in pandemic time, so I don't even know what's happening, but I remember seeing a puppet show back at Lynx Hall years and years ago, and I don't believe I saw you. I think it was Blair Thomas and another group. But can you explain to our people who are coming to us from different places who might not know Chicago organizations very well what Lynx does and what you mean by the Roel era?
Yeah, so Lynx has been around as an organization for over 40 years, and they've been a multidisciplinary organization focusing a lot on movement and theater arts and music, and just very supportive. And so they were in this old building in Wrigleyville near the Cubs Stadium for a long time, and that building was named Lynx Hall, and I think they just took the name of the organization from that building. But then they moved out of that building to another building, and they actually shared, and this is today, they share a space with an organization called Constellation, which specializes in music, and especially jazz and improvised music. And so I'm one of the founders of an organization called Elastic Arts, which has a close affiliation with Constellation, but I thought it was a great marriage of two organizations sharing space between Lynx Hall and Constellation. And so Lynx still holds down the multidisciplinary track and especially a lot of puppetry. And so during Roel Schmidt's era, they were really focusing a lot on puppetry, and especially inclusion of artists of color into that, what is primarily an overwhelmingly white discipline, and audiences are overwhelmingly white as well.
For puppetry, you mean?
Yes, absolutely. And so they kind of really took me on as a project, you know, slightly known to me, but it was really like kind of very gentle and behind the scenes to kind of give me opportunity and give me access in a lot of areas. And so I spent a lot of time doing events there with this one group, especially Rough House Theater, that does I believe it is monthly. It's like with the quarantine, everything's off, but called Nasty Brutus and Short. I think it's maybe every other month. And so I got my start in there, and you know, it's a late night thing, and people maybe had a couple of drinks, and it's like real fun and raucous, and it really introduced me to more of adult puppetry, and not meaning any kind of necessarily risque or profane things, but just puppetry with an intention for adults. And it really opened me up, and they really welcomed me. And that scene is huge on, you know, self-made puppets, and the building aspect of it is really almost a bigger part of it than the actual puppeteering, it seems like, in a lot of ways. And so I was humbled that they allowed me to come into this and be a part of this community, working with a puppet that I did not build, and that was in fact manufactured on a relatively mass scale. So, which kind of segues into how I transitioned to that puppet that you see right behind my left shoulder there, which was made by this woman, Grace Needlman, who is was a part of Rough House, and I met her through that whole scene. And so that, more on that later. But so so I started working with this puppet, and I have had no formal puppetry training. You know, I've been a fan of puppetry, you know, Sesame Street, the Muppets, that kind of stuff, but I just basically am self-taught, and I just have a knack for it. The articulation on this puppet is amazing.
Oh my God.
There he is. So well made, you know. And as offensive items goes, he's probably on the lesser offensive side, but still, you know, the big grin and the huge, you know, dandy, oversized, exaggerated bow tie and such. But his movement, his articulation is just absolutely amazing, and so well crafted. And so I've just really enjoyed working with him. But, you know, I always thought that it might have just a time, a run. So I was working with the puppet prior to 2016, of course. And it was well received. I did have one time a white person came up to me and said that they were offended by what I was doing. And I thought that that was extremely curious. And so, but I took that and accepted that. And so then it kind of died out really. And I wasn't really doing anything. And then, you know, an election happened in 2016, race and, you know, identity politics came to the forefront. And then all of a sudden, phone was literally ringing off the hook with performance opportunities, and people really wanted to have conversations around race. And using this marionette to do that was
Right.
something that was working for people. And so it started this whole new run and rejuvenation for me.
Yeah, in 2016 or thereafter.
So yeah, between 2016, so that's when I started kind of doing it again. And every time I would have an event, someone would book me for another event and another, and then it kind of went that way. And then Roelle saw me at Constellation, and she hadn't seen me in years, but she saw me at Constellation opening up for Mike Reed, who is the owner of Constellation. He's also a world-renowned drummer. And I was hanging out at one of their shows, a big show, when Mike had this project called Flesh and Bone that really talked about this really scary racist incident that he had when he was traveling in Europe, where
Wow.
they were purposefully sent on the wrong train and ended up in a town where there was like a neo-Nazi march,
Oh
and
my
they ended up being kind of held pinned inside of the train station while there was a mob of folks outside. And so
Wow.
that was a very traumatizing event for him. So he kind of created a band to respond to that. And so I was there, they had a back-to-back performances, and I was at the first performance, and one of the guys in the band, Ben Lamar Gay, who I've worked with a lot now, he's a great guy. He said, he went to Mike and was like, hey man, this guy got secrets. This guy got secrets. You know, he's a
Yeah.
puppeteer and he doesn't want to tell anyone, you know? And
Yeah.
Mike's like, what are you talking about? And then I explained to him, he's like, why don't you open for me tomorrow, you know? And I was
Nice.
like, okay, you know? And so with like, you know, 12 hours notice, here I am opening up for him in this like NPR, like all this, like, it was a big deal, this band.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
fantastic.
Roelle was there, she saw me, and then she said, you know, I see your puppetry. I think you would do well with a residency at Ragdale.
Oh,
And I was
wow.
like, Ragdale? I've heard of Ragdale, but it's like that kind of imaginary thing. It's like unicorns. It's like, I've heard of it, but I've never been there or seen it or know what it's about or anything like that. And so per her recommendation, I received a residency in February of 2018. And
Uh-huh.
that was transformative for me, and really I'm still kind of living off of the work that I started there. And so it's been amazing. So all of these things kind of have these threads of connection.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually gonna revisit that point, that small thing that you mentioned about a white man. I'm assuming is a man. I don't know.
It
A
was,
white,
yes.
okay. I'm being my own. I have my own biases in my head about certain people, but uh, coming up to you after your show saying that they were offended, but then can you go a little deeper into that? Did you have a more conversation, or did you just kind of receive that and say, okay, thanks for your comments? Like, how did you handle that? And why
Yeah,
did you ask?
I did. You know, I felt like we didn't have an in-depth conversation because it didn't seem like he really wanted to kind of get into it like that.
Mm-hmm.
But he definitely, you know, let me know that he felt uncomfortable, and he felt that, you know, and honestly, even though we didn't have a deep conversation about that, it's been something that I think about all the time, about how that is perceived in the larger world. And frankly, I was pretty nervous when my friend and collaborator Marvin Tate asked me to bring him back out shortly. This was in November, like a
Yeah.
week after
Right.
the election
Yeah.
or so. He asked me to perform with him, and it was at a very small space. It wasn't even an official venue. It was like a jewelry store that had performances and stuff on the north side. And I said, okay. And so when I went, I really wanted to tell people please don't take any video of this, because I was kind of concerned with people taking video of it and then pushing that out through their channels and having that be either misunderstood
Right.
or reused in a way that was negative. And so I was very concerned about it, but I had to like let that go and kind of let people have their own conclusions, try to explain it to them, but let people have their own conclusions. And so that's why to this day, I don't really have a lot of public facing videos of the
Right.
puppetry. There's a couple that I have that I'll send to people specifically, but I really don't try to like make these things go viral.
Right, because you want to be careful and protective of yourself, because it could go, like you said, it could, the idea could be used in a negative way against you personally too, and against other people of color personally as well, as we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, my feeling was that since he was at Elastic Arts, you know, generally speaking, our audiences are like very thoughtful, really cool people. And so I think that he was thinking that no one, it's just like there's the, and rightfully so, there's the camp of people that says that, you know, no one should be able to use the N-word, not
Right,
even Black people, and it should just be eradicated.
right.
So I think it was maybe under
It was,
that kind of sentiment of like, there should not be any negative depictions of Black people, even from Black people, you know?
I understand that now that you're saying that. I also am just so curious, and I really want to say I appreciate your sharing that story, because of course you can always say no, I don't want to talk about that or whatever, but I appreciate your sharing that story in this space. So let's shift a little bit. You had some things you wanted to do a screen share and show us, right?
Yeah, so give it a little context. So I was humming along for, you know, several years doing this marionette puppetry and, you know, increasingly feeling like I wanted to kind of more overtly join the Chicago puppetry community by working with a puppet that was a unique puppet, something that preferably that I built, but at the very least that was a one of a kind type piece. And so I had been kind of putting that energy out there, but I didn't know how to take the next step to move forward with that. And so unrelated, I started doing some family history research. And it's like my mom and my father separated when I was very young. And so I knew a lot about my mom's side of the family, but I really didn't know much at all about my dad's side of the family. And I really felt that I had a strong connection with that side, even though I didn't have much overt connection with them.
Sure.
And it just was always there, like something is there. And I know there's a story there. It's so odd. It's like, it is the weirdest thing, but I knew something was there.
You,
Just from the fact, for instance, that I grew up as an Episcopalian,
okay.
and the reason why I did was my mom always told me that, you know, she grew up Baptist, but when
Okay.
she married my father, she converted to being an Episcopalian. And so
Okay.
I was like, wait a minute, this rural town in West Tennessee, 40 miles outside of Memphis, there were Black Episcopalians in this town of less than 2,000, you know?
Yeah.
Like that alone was like, I was so curious about that, but I had no information. And so, you know, so I do it. I started my family history research as a lot of people do by going like sites like Ancestry and so forth. And so I did an Ancestry DNA test, and it came back that I was 30% European ancestry, and in fact 20% just
What?
English alone. You know,
Okay.
and so I was like, okay. And then, you know, I've since learned that you know, most African Americans have at least 20% European ancestry in them. So I think that's one of the things that we still haven't figured out a way to kind of articulate of how we're really a multicultural people,
Right.
by and large, Black people in this country, um,
Right.
as it relates to our DNA makeup. But so then I was like, okay, I really want to find out more information. So I just started asking questions, and I would just, as a side note, just say for anyone who has interest in family history, just start asking questions You don't know where they will lead. And so I just started asking questions to everyone. And it ended up that some people who were right under my nose, who were distant relatives who live in the Chicago area. In fact, I grew up in St. Louis. I've been here 25 years.
Did you?
Yes.
My husband's from St. Louis. We'll talk about that
Oh,
privately.
yes. We got to talk about that. So my mom, when she comes to visit, she always goes to see our cousin Bertha. And so, Bertha's there, and I really didn't even know exactly how we were related. And so in this whole, I asked my mom, who should I ask about this family history? And she said, well, talk to Bertha. And so I called Bertha, and she said, well, talk to my daughter. And I had actually met her once, and it was over her house on an Easter holiday one year. And so I called her, and it's such a long story, but she ends up telling me that I need to meet this man, John Marshall.
Okay.
And I said, who is John Marshall? And it turns out he is a descendant of the people that enslaved my entire father's side of my family, both sides of my father's side,
Wow.
for like over 100 years, pretty much continuously.
Yeah.
And so I met John Marshall, who is now a judge in the Memphis area.
Yeah.
And he is I think it's more, technically he's an amateur historian, but he is like very deep. It's almost like an obsession with him, fortunately. And he's been doing this research since the 70s. And he's only like in his late 50s today. So he's been doing this ever since he was basically a kid, going around interviewing folks. Started out as, learning about his family history, and his family were slave owners or slaveholders. And by extension, he started investigating and documenting the history of some of the enslaved people that were closest to his family. So what is, commonly known as house slaves, which they called servants, and they didn't actually call these particular subset of people slaves, oddly enough. And so a lot of those people were people from my family. And so he had been documenting this stuff. And so when I met him, it was like winning the lottery for genealogy. Yes, it is so much like this. It's like, here you go. You won 1 million pieces of content, 1 million documents. And I've been like really combing through that ever since. This was late 2018, early 2019. So basically the entire 2019, I was diving through this stuff on a daily basis. And so I have some stuff here.
Yeah.
So I'll minimize this. All right. So this, for instance, is an image, not a very good image, but it's an image of,
good Lord,
of what they call Berry Hill, which was a plantation in Southern Virginia. And so I learned the story about how my ancestors basically walked from Southern Virginia to West Tennessee in the early 1800s, once cotton became king and the cotton gin. And so there's like all of these, as some people likely know, slavery was kind of on its knees at one point when they had, overworked the lands in the East and the South, the Southeast. And there was a big sentiment to try to just get rid of slavery for obvious reasons. And they had stopped the transatlantic slave trade at this point. But then the cotton gin came into dominance, and they found out that they could make all this money from cotton. And so everyone had kind of a land rush out what was west at that time, which was, the Deep South today. And my family was part of that movement and that migration. And so left this Berry Hill farm in Virginia, very southern Virginia, near the North Carolina border. Yeah.
I have a question. So were your family was leaving with the family that owned them to go to different places? So the family of the John Marshall family, his ancestors took your family and walked from Berry Hill to another place. How far was that trip?
Hundreds of miles. I mean, from Virginia to West Tennessee.
So that the owners took horses and buggies or whatever,
yes.
and they walk. I'm
And
just
I've
gonna,
seen depictions of that. I've seen some like kind of drawings that depict, I don't know if I have one handy, but it basically, so the image that I've been able to find relates to, so what was a more common practice were people who had lands and owned slaves in Virginia, North Carolina, those areas. They would sell unwanted slaves to these people who would corral them and then move them in mass to the deep south and sell them. So, you know, there's like kind of slave driver type folks. And so that wasn't the case for the people that my family was affiliated with. They actually, as a family, for the most part, some people stayed behind, but a large group of them moved out west and they just relocated and
yeah,
they took their property with them. And
sure.
so that's how we ended up getting there, which I think, and that's one of the reasons why this history stays intact, is because we weren't just sold off piecemeal. And so families went together and
Right.
remained families and remained with the same people and kept that line of information and documentation going forward for the most part.
Yeah. Wow. Show us more. Tell us more.
So this one, so one of the most powerful documents that I came across in this whole thing is the bill of sale for my great great grandfather, where
Oh,
he was sold at the age of 16 for the sum of $650, which
oh,
was a pretty good sum. And it's incredibly difficult to read this. And this was in 1846. Um,
yeah.
and, you know, his name was Phil McBride, or as he's known in this document as Fillmore McBride. And
Yeah.
it was a very powerful document for me to see. And actually, I have an image of him. And I really speculated. I thought that a whole story could just be written about him in particular. So there he is.
Oh my God.
And when most people see him, they say, was he one of the slave owners? You know?
Right. Right.
And so he was obviously multiracial.
Yeah.
And
There's time.
he actually is one of the people that he was not a part of this whole Virginia to West Tennessee family migration.
Yeah.
He was from Missouri. He was born in Missouri, and I grew
Where
up in
was
Missouri.
he born in
You know,
Missouri? Do you know
yeah,
where he was born?
I don't know where, but I've talked to John Marshall about it, and he seems to think that it was more than likely in where the Missouri and the Mississippi rivers converge, which is
Yeah.
just north of St. Louis, what they call
Yeah.
North County or the North Suburbs.
Yeah.
And so if he was from that area, obviously I lived within 15 miles of that area, but I like to speculate that he was a somewhat loved illegitimate child of a slave owner
Yeah.
and slave mistress, and
Yeah.
that he had to be kind of sent away because the woman of the house would not stand to have that bastard around, you know?
Yeah.
And so I see him being shipped off. But one of the curious things is he wasn't shipped off to do hard labor. Quite the contrary, he was sold to a single man who
Oh.
was a carpenter and engineer,
Mhm.
and he essentially became his apprentice
Oh, wow.
and learned all of these skills, and hence one of the reasons why he was able to have like photos like that taken of him. And so that really kind of started that whole thing out. And so it was, I just like to guess at the
Yeah.
story behind how he ended up in West Tennessee and all of
Yeah.
that good stuff. And so it's very
Well,
interesting.
I know it's interesting to put those layers of your imagination on top of this, and it is so fascinating that you have the bill of sale. I mean, here's
Yes.
right now I'm thinking, oh my gosh, Sam is so lucky to have this information, and then I think this information is terrible information. Of course, it's about owning people, and it's our history. And it's a terrible history, but we need to know it, of
We
course.
definitely need to know it, and how we come to terms with that and how we process and present that, I think, is the is
Is
where the is the goal, you know. And so, yeah, because, you know, I want to know the history, and I was actually thinking about it this morning as I was like taking a shower. I was like, you know, really, for me, this was so valuable into giving me a sense to know that without a doubt, for a fact, my family, my people have been in this land before it was the United States. You know, that is a documented fact. And so when people tell me, you know, and I've had people tell me this, to go back to Africa or what have you, and, you know,
right,
my retort is usually, I've been here longer than you know, like,
right.
if you are from anywhere in like Eastern Europe, I have definitely been here longer than you,
Yeah.
and anywhere that's associated with you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And
And here's,
so, yeah, it gives me a sense to me of, you know, really feeling like an American and wanting to make America better, wanting to make America meet my
right.
needs instead of me trying to conform to that expectation or to just abandon this idea, you know? And so these two people here is whoops, the Taylors, and these folks, especially Mary Goodloe Somerville Taylor, is
Yeah.
the reason why I'm an Episcopalian, or grew up as an Episcopalian, uh,
Okay.
and because they were the benevolent slave owners who made sure that, I'm sure, those heathens had some church, you know. You know what's so funny is, you know, she was one of the main people who brought just the Episcopal Church in general to West Tennessee, or to that area. um, you know, I'm sure from their ties to England and so forth, and he
Right.
kind of just went along for the ride, more or less. And
Right.
I actually saw, I found, and I don't have it handy, but I found an article during Reconstruction, and I think it was even in a Boston newspaper, and they were referencing, you know, a former slave owner who knows what the thing is, you know, who's, you know, forward thinking. And it was a quote from him talking about, you know, that he tries to help his former slaves out, and they come to him for advice, and he's more than happy to help them and get them on the straight track.
Right.
And he really thinks they need someone to watch over them, and he's willing to do that kind of thing. And he was the example of someone who was, you know, who thought about it in the right way, you know,
Right.
type of
Right.
thing. So they had a small church built that actually got burned down, but then they rebuilt it, or I should say, my family rebuilt it in still during slavery. And they, where is it? Here it is. And it
Oh.
still stands today, and it's
And
called Old Trinity, or Trinity in the Fields, because
this
it's literally in
in a,
an acre that is surrounded by trees, but otherwise is in the middle of what was then cotton fields.
so this is in Tennessee.
Yeah, this is in near the town where I was born. And so this was the place where my family became Episcopalians, where my great great grandmother was baptized in the Episcopal Church. And so I went here. This photo is from 2019 Father's Day weekend. And I went there, and I'm so thankful that I did. And they have a service there once a year on Trinity Sunday.
Mm.
And the white descendants of the church and the black descendants of the church, because both folks, both groups attended the church at different times. It's a
Okay.
one-room church, doesn't have, there's outhouses in the back, there's no piano,
Sure.
there's, you know, there's nothing but a room and pews, you
Right.
know.
Right.
um, and so they hold a service there, and then they have a big, you know, usually an outdoor picnic on these grounds. But it was so hot that they decided to move to the brick church that the white people built during Reconstruction, called Trinity as well. And then they helped the black people build a church, and they called it St. Paul's, and that was the church I was born into.
Okay.
And so I attended a service here, and it was really, I'm not a religious person today. I'm a spiritual person, but it was one of the most one of the most transformational experiences that I've ever had. Like sitting on these pews that I knew my ancestors sat on,
Yeah.
feeling the cross breeze come through these windows, and bugs would meander in and fly around and fly out. And it was just so peaceful. And for not having air conditioning or even a fan, it was quite comfortable, I must say. And I really got a sense of how people kind of dealt with things in that time. And it really transformed. It's like a time machine. And so I
Yeah.
was very fortunate for that.
So all of this research into your family and all of this knowledge base has led you to a project that I want to mention right now. How did this move from your Ragdale residency, all this research, all of these things? Where is this tying into what you're working on now? And is this inspiring you to write your story?
It really is. And, it's been a process of kind of coming to terms with it. I mean, being an artist, I receive information and experiences, and I just want to kind of process that through the arts. And so when I started learning this information, I was like, well, how can I kind of manifest this? And I thought about maybe could it be a play? Could it be, what could it be? And so I had the pleasure of working with this a fellow Black puppeteer that goes by Geppetto, like Geppetto, but Geppetto. And he's amazing builder and an amazing puppeteer. And I did a show with him on the International Puppet Theater Festival the last go round. And he had a piece called Just Another Lynching. And he used these rod puppets to tell this story. And I was like, that's it. I want a rod puppet. And I was like, I want rod puppet representations of my family. And that's how I can tell this story. And so I talked about it with Grace Needlman, who was a great builder. And she helped build the puppet that's over my left shoulder there, sitting in the chair. And that representation of my grandfather. And he is currently decked out in a dashiki for an upcoming performance, but normally he is, and he was built off of this image here.
Oh my God.
And so I have a blue shirt for him and some overalls, some little baby overalls. And so this is what I'm doing and working with him. And so, Geppetto works with his son because it takes multiple people to manipulate a rod puppet usually. And so I started getting my sons involved. I have two sons, one's 12 and one is 15.
Oh.
And so we started kind of working, and this whole thing has just been kind of an exploration of how I want to tell this story. And to your point, the more I've been kind of working through and processing this, I thought that maybe it should be some type of book, but there's no shortage of people discovering slave history and wanting to put that down in book. And so I'm like, well, what makes mine different, or what is there left to say on that subject? And so I'm still kind of grappling with that. And that's why I thought puppetry would be an interesting way to kind of try to tell this story.
Yeah.
But I do have to still, even if it's a puppetry told story, there's going to be a lot of writing that I have to do to make that happen. So
both. And there's also no reason why it can't morph and move back in between different kinds of art forms too. But to your point of it being puppetry, this is how you tell a story. This is your joy. So it has to be puppets, right?
It really does. And and it's like I was, it's just trying to break through so many preconceived notions. And so when I first started, I was like, yeah, Grace helped me build this guy, but you don't have to put any rods on his legs, because I think I envision him just being seated like he is right now, and like kind of telling this story. And then as he's telling the story, maybe it's told through shadow puppetry or told through some live action or something like that. But I thought that he was going to be sitting. And so now, as recently as the 4th of July that I was mentioning to you earlier, I have gotten him up and moving, because I was like messing with him one day, and actually my son came up with the idea, because the way I had us holding him, it was so linear based, and I had his head in one arm and my son had the body in the other arm, and then my other son had the legs. And so we were both like down this meridian. And my son said, you know, it's hard. Why can't I just control both of the arms so I can do things? I know the left arm will know what the right arm is doing, you know? And it was such a simple statement, but it was so mind-blowing as to how we can manipulate this thing. And so then all of a sudden he was like dancing and he was like doing all this stuff. And I was like, oh my God. It was like, there was a DJ on Ninth Wonder was doing a live IG. And we just started, he was playing some like old music that you hear like at the family barbecue and stuff. And I just had him dancing, and I was like, James at the barbecue. And I just put it on Facebook. It was so rough. The video was horrible as far as composition, but I did that. And I was like, I think we're on to something here. And so that led to this here. And so Yeah, you know, it's part of this kind of exquisite corpse type performance where you have three collaborators and I create a piece and then I send it to the second person. They create a piece based off mine and then they send the second piece to the third person, et cetera. And then we put it all together. So the entire thing is like about 15 minutes. And I collaborated with multidisciplinary artist Jennifer Lagaya and movement artist Maya Odom.
Okay.
And I think it's going to be great. And so that's going to kind of premiere in August, I think. And they were thinking maybe getting it outside and screening it outside, or I don't know how they're planning on doing it. But so, yeah, I was really excited about that. And I did it on the extremely hot 4th of July. And it was really interesting because, you know, I definitely was one to kind of take it easy, cook out, do that kind of thing on the 4th of July, except I didn't feel that way this year.
Yeah.
You know, after coming off of Juneteenth, and I was really like, I've celebrated Juneteenth in the past, but this year it had like a special resonance with me.
Yeah.
And so on the 4th of July, it took me honestly till it was about 1 o'clock, and I was like, oh yeah, it is the 4th of July. You know, it was like it didn't even really hit me.
Right.
And so I went out and recorded the video, and it was extremely hot, and I was like sweating in that one scene. As we were planting the corn, and my sons were complaining, but I'm like, you're getting paid, just be quiet and do what you gotta do, you know? And so the corn that we planted, incidentally, is starting to grow. So
where next? What's happening next? What are you working on after? Because you finished your section of the exquisite corpse. Now where does our great grandfather go?
So yeah, like I mentioned, he's wearing this dashiki. I'm going to be doing a piece. There he is. I'm
Yeah.
going to be doing this piece on the 25th. We're going to record it. You know, because the Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, DCASE for short, of course, is not doing a lot of their normal Millennium Park summertime festivals and all this stuff, which includes the jazz festival. And so they approached the Birdhouse organization, which is a not-for-profit that is established in the memory of Fred Anderson, who was a saxophonist and club owner. He owned a club called the Velvet Lounge on the near South Side in the South Loop. And so they asked us to create a video, and we're going to have the Mai Sugimoto trio perform, but then I'm also going to do a duet with Elastic Arts executive director and multi-instrumentalist Adam Zanellini. And so we're going to do a song based on something that Phil Karan, who was a harpist and he created this instrument called the Frankenphone. He played with Sun Ra and was like just a brilliant, brilliant person. He transitioned not too long ago, but he talked about doing things in the rhythm of 7. And he talks about the rhythm itself, but then also how to dance to it.
Yeah.
And so we're going to kind of do a song in the time of 7. And I'm going to do a dance, the same dance, because he's on video years ago, back in the 80s, doing this movement. And so I'm going to incorporate that movement. And we're going to call the piece Ancestral Kinetics. And so basically how the ancestors still move within our daily lives. And they're not just this kind of stagnant, fixed thing.
I love that idea, and I can't wait to hear more and see more about it. So I hope that you'll share that with us with Artist Bookhouse. We can put it in our newsletter and on our Facebook page too.
Great.
Now you're an official Quarantour guest. You're a part of our history as well.
Yes, I'm so excited about your organization and the things that, you know, just the beginning. So,
yes.
So, you know, I mentioned John Marshall, and he has written, self-published a couple of books, and one is called Mason, A Glimpse into the Past, and it talks just about kind of the history, the long time. Oh, I did bookmark. I found the letter that I wanted to read from. It's
Oh,
so funny.
good.
It was in here. I was like looking in the wrong book. But in this book, he talks mostly about his family and so forth. But then there's this other book called The Early History of Mason, which is kind of a patrilineal accounting of the various families in Mason, Black families in
Yeah,
Mason. And
yeah,
this person was the great great grandfather of this person. Who was this,
right.
this, and and then you can kind of cross reference it because there wasn't a lot of people, and pretty much everyone there is kind of related
Yeah.
in a certain sense. That these books have been obviously invaluable. And when I was talking to my cousin and she was telling me about this history and I told her who my grandfather was, she goes, "Oh, so your great grandfather was this person and your great," I was like, "Where are you getting this information from?" And she said, "From this book, and you got to have it." And so I now have them. I got them just last year. So I have those two books. And then he also has this letters from his family, all of these transcribed letters, and he put on here, "To Sam Lewis, this is part of your history." And these are the letters from the white families. And so he's kind of hinting there, and I've asked him, he's been very coy. It's like, it's a very complicated thing because I want to ask him, are we related, and if
Who is
we are, that means that,
right?
you do the math.
Right,
And
exactly.
so it's been really, he's open. And I think and it's not just me that he's dealing with. He works with a bunch of Black families. He goes to like Black Episcopal churches, Black churches in general, family reunions, and he speaks to Black people and tries to reconnect people with their history. And I was going to finish my thought earlier when I was in the shower. I thought that just in terms of reparations, a
Hmm.
huge part of reparations to us, besides the money, would be just give us our history back,
Right. The
because running across this man who has this information, I'm sure there's people who have the same or more information, or maybe less, but whatever you have in those family Bibles, in those wills, in those documents,
right.
um, give it up. Let us piece together. And I really feel like part of the extended reparations package should be free, ancestral discovery for us. We shouldn't have to
Right.
pay anything to anyone to kind of try to reclaim our story.
Right. I agree. I
And
agree.
so,
So,
so yeah, so there's all these letters, and I know time is short. We're actually at time, but I just want to
yeah.
really read
Okay.
this letter real quick. And so, this letter is this is during Reconstruction, and it's written between brothers. And one brother is in West Tennessee, and the other brother is back east in Virginia. And so, obviously during Reconstruction, especially a good part of Reconstruction, it was really tough on a lot of white people in the sense of they didn't have their labor force, they didn't have their income, they were also losing power as far as elected office, because a lot of African Americans were in elected office during this time. And so here is his letter. So this letter was written by Dr. William L. Terry, husband of Sally Hunt Terry, in April 1867 to his brother in Virginia. "My dear brother, your very welcomed letter has just been received, and I was truly glad to hear from you once more. We have had the hardest times out here I have ever seen before, and are taxed so high on everything that it is a difficult matter to make a living for a large family. But times are a little better this year than they were last. We made good crops and got a good price for them, and it has improved the country very much. And one other good crop will make times easier. Great many have been forced into bankruptcy, and others will be. Sam Taylor is more in debt, it is said, than he has the means to pay. And I understand that all the land Fred Macklin owns in his own name was sold to pay security money for Sam's last court date, and that
mm,
his life interest in his wife's land will be sold. I hear that Fred will loan $15,000 by Sam. He has to pay $30,000 for Sam, and Sam has treated Fred badly. Sam is on Deer Creek and is a perfect sot, and I don't think will live 6 months unless he quits drink.
Huh.
My children help me a good deal. Lucy does our cooking, and Tommy and Eddie and George all help me. I can't get a cook and have tried very hard to do so. I have more hands this year than I had last, but not as many as I would like to have. We have no servants at all and are living as economically as we can to try to get along. This country is nothing like it was when you was out here and is under Negro rule to a great extent now. Dick Somerville is almost broke, and so is Bob Pete. Both have signed over all of their property to their creditors, and Bob is still living at his same place. How do you think I could get along in Virginia if I was to sell out here and move back and improve my land out there and settle on? Could I get any practice there? I wish you would write me a long letter as soon as you see this and let me know all about how you all are doing and if lands are rising any in value out there, and if you think I could get laborers to cultivate a crop if I was out there. And this is the best line. I wish I had some of the old family Negroes out here. And that's how he ends it.
Oh, wow. That is intense. Holy cow. Thank you for sharing that.
No problem. And so I love that, you know, it's basically just like any letter you would write today. It's like you start out with the gossip and catching people up. That person's a drunk. That person's broke. This person owes that person money. Like, now that I got all the dirt out of the way, any work out there, you know, like, her to get back to me, you know?
Sam, I really want to thank you so much for this. It was such a joy to talk to you and to get this moment to have this conversation. I am so grateful that you joined us today. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Quarantour with Sam Lewis. If you're enjoying these Quarantours, please consider donating to artistbookhouse.org/donate. We appreciate your support. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week.